I feel very humble and honored to be in this space and to be among so many wonderful and great speakers and experts. So I am the medicinal cannabis advocate and authorized prescriber, but also now I'm a medical director for Medijuana educational organization and campus lifestyle clinic. And for the purpose of disclosure and transparency, I am commercially involved with both of these organizations. So today, I'm going to share my clinical experience with you, but also perhaps go through briefly through the prescribing process in Australia as well. So cannabis is a versatile, multi-target therapeutic agent that interacts with the human body, both through the endocannabinoid system, as well as many other metabolic pathways, both through receptor and non-receptor mechanisms. And it can be used to treat multiple medical conditions, as well as multiple symptoms simultaneously, thus reducing the need for polypharmacy. And I just want to emphasize the importance of whole plant medicine concept, because in the beginning of the 20th century, pharmaceutical companies started introducing single molecule synthetic agents, and we doctors were trained to rely on them as effective, reliable, predictable, evidence-based and supported by research, and at the same time looking down on plants and herbs as inferior. But unfortunately, this approach led to the creation of huge polypharmacy, and it is not unusual to see patients who are taking anything between 10 to 20 different medications for different symptoms, and each of the medications is coming with a long list of adverse effects, including death when overdosed. So with regards to medicinal cannabis, this is not just one medicine. There's hundreds of compounds, each having its unique modulatory and pharmacological properties, and all working together synergistically in achieving the therapeutic effect. So this is not just about THC or just about CBD. According to the theory of entourage effect that we've been hearing about it so much this weekend, one compound is not as effective as the whole working together. And patients tend to respond to and tolerate whole plant extracts better than single extracts. And for example, synthetic THC is associated with multiple adverse effects, including anxiety, panic, paranoia, depersonalization. And now, some scientists postulate that many medical conditions, especially the one related to immune system and inflammation, could be due to the deficiency in the endocannabinoid system, which, as we know, plays a very important role in maintaining health and homeostasis. And perhaps some patients are not making enough receptors or endocannabinoids for the system to work efficiently. And perhaps these deficiencies could be treated successfully with a cannabis medicine. And that theory was postulated first by Dr. F.N. Russo in 2004. So the list of potential clinical application is very long. Here I've just listed some very basic ones, which includes chronic cancer, non-cancer pain, fibromyalgia, palliative care, chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, epilepsy, spasticity in multiple sclerosis, and various neurodegenerative diseases. So my focus as a GP is chronic debilitating pain, because this has been one of the most common presentations in general practice. We GPs deal with it every day, but also it is one of the most common reasons that patients seek medicinal cannabis. And this is also a significant, very serious public health problem, because at least about 20% of adult Australians suffer from some chronic pain, and about as high as 80% of nursing home residents suffer from chronic pain. And I believe that many behavioral problems among patients who suffer from dementia might be due to unrecognized and poorly treated pain. Also, huge cost to Australian economy, at least 35 billion or probably more per year. Of lost in cost to lost time at work and treatment costs. So this is very complex patient. They suffer a lot. They went through a lot of hardship, and quite often they feel let down by the health system. And pain comes with multiple comorbidities, which includes depression, anxiety, PTSD, insomnia, drug addiction. And dealing with pain becomes a 24-hour job. It affects them on multiple levels, mental, emotional, social, physical, professional as well. So on top of that, these people have to rely on a cocktail of heavy drugs, which unfortunately, as we know, don't fully control their symptoms. Their functionality is affected, but also they deal with multiple adverse effects, and which, for example, opioids, which control pain to some degree, but also come with a long list of adverse effects, which includes excessive sedation, dizziness, nausea, vomiting, constipation, tolerance, physical dependence, and death when overdosed. So very sadly, we are responsible for creating opioid epidemic around the world. And according to data from Victoria Coroner's Code, 80% of deaths due to overdose are caused by legally prescribed pharmaceuticals, especially opioids and benzodiazepines. So Australia is ranking number 8 about top opioid consuming nations. And states in America where cannabis is legal report drop in opioid abuse hospitalization rates. So now I'm going to talk about my patient group. Until March 2008, it was impossible for me as a GP to obtain approval for medicinal cannabis. It was long, bitter battle, at times really demoralizing. I had to fight for one patient from July 2017 till March to obtain this approval, and finally, after so many months, especially battling New South Wales Health Department, that patient obtained the approval. But I have to admit, although the system is not ideal, things have changed since the middle of March last year. So I have obtained approval for 82 patients, 43 patients under Special Access Scheme B, and 39 under authorized prescriber. Since October 2018, I've been using an authorized prescriber pathway, and I was approved for chronic non-cancer and non-cancer pain, where not responding to conventional pharmaceuticals, and where patients develop adverse effects, plus nausea and vomiting in cancer patients. So demographics. Okay, so I have 43 females in that group and 39 males. The age is ranging between 21 and 93. My oldest patient is 93. And what's really quite interesting, but now I'm seeing people in their 70s and 80s that I probably would never expect to see them a few years ago. And about 38% of this small group of patients is injury related somehow in the past. So this statistics somehow correlate with the general public statistics. So I had one patient with epilepsy, one patient with autism and epilepsy. I also have one patient with schizoaffective disorder and PTSD. It is very fascinating when we hear that cannabis shouldn't be prescribed for patients with a history of psychosis. So he approached me in the end of November, and I applied pure CBD. And what I am observing now, that the CBD for this patient is showing superior effectiveness, tolerance, and safety in comparison to all the antipsychotics that he used in the past. I also had 8 patients who came to me for cancer-related pain. 4 of them unfortunately passed away, but they did experience the beneficial effect of cannabis in the last days of their life, which included improved mood, improved appetite, overall quality of life, and as they also improved pain, and they managed to use less opioids. And their family commented that it allowed them to communicate with their loved ones the way they used to. And the rest of my patients came with non-cancer related pain. So with the non-cancer pain, as we can see, that pain was secondary to many, many medical conditions. So they came because of pain due to ulcerative colitis, or cervical and lumbar spondylosis, multiple sclerosis, fibromyalgia, congenital hemangioma. The list goes on and on. Pain can be due to so many clinical conditions. And with regards to cancer pain, I had patients with squamous cell carcinoma of the neck, then metastatic cancer of the colon, endometrium, breast, prostate, B-cell lymphoma, and pseudomyxoma peritoneae. So these patients also presented with many other comorbidities, which included high cholesterol, diabetes, blood pressure, ischemic heart disease, renal impairment, reflux, bipolar disorder. I have patients, about 2 or 3 with bipolar disorder, who presented to me with chronic pain, and I did use equal THC to equal CBD. The monitoring was very close in the beginning. I was making phone calls every day to ensure that they are okay. But it didn't bring about any psychosis. The pain is much better tolerated, and they mood and insomnia. So multiple benefits here. And sometimes I think it pays to be courageous as long as we are prepared to be really involved in the care of the patient. So what did I use? Obviously, I am limited to what I can use, and I can only use what is legally available. So I did use pure CBD. I also used low THC and high CBD formulation, and equal THC, equal CBD. And what I am already discovering, even in that relative short period of time, a small number of people, that the equal THC to equal CBD appear to be more effective in the management of chronic pain. And they also allow to use smaller volume, so it might be cost effective as well. What adverse effects? I'm already observing that cannabis is much safer than other pharmaceuticals. The most common effect was just mild drowsiness, which was mitigated by having more cannabis at night. Some patients experienced a bit of fatigue, but as one of them commented, the other effects are so great. I sometimes am pain-free and I feel so much better that I can cope with the fatigue. And some of them felt a bit agitated, experiencing dry mouth and increased appetite in the beginning, but the symptoms subsided as we continued. So I was unsuccessful with one patient with epilepsy and one with epilepsy with autism. It aggravated those symptoms, but it doesn't mean that cannabis doesn't work for this condition. This is that just this product didn't work for these patients. But in ideal world, if I have access to multiple formulations with different cannabinoid, terpenes, and flavonoid ratios, and if these formulations were easily accessible and affordable, I feel confident with the patient and time and working with the patient, we could still find the right product for them. But it was too expensive, and family and patient decided not to go ahead, which is fair enough. Cannabis is not panacea for everything. It may help many people, but not everyone will respond. And as doctors, we have to accept it. And we simply stop. Nothing happened. There's no long-term sequela. They didn't go crazy. I also have 3 patients who had episode of psychoactive experience. So with 2 of them, it was easily mitigated by simply stopping cannabis for about 4 days and then restarting at a lower dose. But also something interesting happened. We are so afraid as a society of psychoactive effects, but perhaps this is opening up for all the suppressed and painful emotions that we want to run away from. One of the patients commented, actually, after that episode, I was able to stand up to my dysfunctional mother. The other one, who was an artist, and his artistic abilities were blocked through all of this pain, he said, actually, now look at my drawings. And he brought them for me, and well, I was really impressed. The 3rd patient, she was a lady with fibromyalgia. She was using 2 formulations, and the effect for her was rather subtle. So she was considering stopping anyway because she said, the cost doesn't justify what I am experiencing. But then after about a couple of months, she had this episode, and that was the final port for her, so she decided that's it. So look, it shows that in a proper clinical practice, we can manage all of that. We can look after our patient. And to me, it becomes, I feel like medicine is becoming an art. So what are the benefits? Quite many. What I'm concluding now that even though I've been prescribing cannabis for a relatively short period of time, just about 12 months, and that for a relatively small number of people, I am observing that cannabis is emerging as a safe therapeutic option, but also it can treat many medical conditions at the same time, even though my main indication is chronic pain. But I hear a patient, by the way, my Crohn's has never been better. My reflux has improved. I could stop my Nexium. Oh, by the way, my sugars have improved. And then, you know what? My skin condition has improved so much, and I don't know why it happened. Patients report improved functionality. They start going to the gym. They start socializing again and enjoy activities that they couldn't before. And interestingly, some of my patients, just coming back to the first part, that with huge obesity, they actually managed to lose a lot of weight, anything between 10 to 20 kilos. And most of all, improvement in overall quality of life. And this is amazing to watch these changes. Improved mood, and also improved ability to focus, motivate, and concentrate. When I first had some of my patients saying, my mind is not so foggy, and I thought, well, cannabis, you know, your mind, you're more clear, you're supposed to be dopey. So that was quite interesting. And they start sort of looking forward to do things they couldn't do before, go back to work, start small business, start enjoying some activities. And with regards to pain, various degrees of reduction in pain. So for some modest, but let's say if someone has been experiencing pain, anything at the level 9 to 10, and then it comes down to 7, it's significant for this patient. Also, for many patients, they have significant improvement in pain and periods of no pain. And another important point, at least about 50% of my patients started reducing or even stopping the other medication and improved sleep. I would say that at least 90%, almost like every patient saying, I never slept better. Also coming back to that improved ability to focus, motivate, and concentrate, quite a few of them said, my driving is better now. I am a better driver. When I was on all of these drugs and I couldn't sleep properly and I was in pain, sometimes I wouldn't even remember how I got from point to A to B. And I'm driving better, I'm a bit slower, but I am cautious. So I think we need to take into consideration these comments as well. And interestingly, no dose escalation observed. Patients tend to rely on small doses and no drug-seeking behavior, which happens, as we know, quite commonly with opioids. Now, what is the better way to talk about benefits as patients? So this is Anne. Anne is a wonderful woman. She's loved by her family and her friends, and as her husband commented, her laughter and her smile is infectious. And for the last 10 years, Anne has been fighting a rare form of cancer, pseudomyxoma peritonei. She underwent multiple surgeries and multiple courses of chemotherapy that almost killed her. But now we can see she enjoys the ocean and she enjoys going on holidays, which she has done a lot since last May when we introduced medicinal cannabis for her. So what Anne said, this is her own words, I am more relaxed and able to cope with things. I am off all opioid pain medications, eating, sleeping, and overall my wellness has improved. I feel that I am back in control. Now we've got Alexandra. Alexandra passed away in October last year from metastatic cancer of the endometrium. And that's what her family shared with me. Cannabis enabled the doctors to keep Alia's opioids and morphine-based medication to a minimum. Keeping opioids down gave the family time to interact with a lucid version of Alia. Now, Jeremy, patient with schizoaffective disorder, he said, while the stresses are still present, my symptoms are little to none. In addition to this, I have lost over 10 kilos, quit smoking, my asthma has improved, and my cognitive ability is better. He's back at uni now and working part-time. So this is Lisa and me. Lisa approached me in May last year, and she presented with a long-term history of chronic debilitating pain, secondary to right trigeminal neuralgia, bilateral temporomandibular joint dysfunction, cervical and spondylus spondylosis, and left subacromial bursitis. And this is the comments from Lisa. She said to me, my life was a mess. Chronic pain had ended my career and all I loved. With the depression, chronic fatigue, and other illnesses, it dragged me down to the bottom of the pit. And then she commented about cannabis effect on her pain. Once unbearable, becomes bearable, and in some cases non-existent. You feel better able to cope. And the great joy of it all is that there are no crippling or biologically damaging side effects. And that's what Lisa said, and this is her message. Australia must make medical cannabis available to all who need it, and most especially affordable for all who need it. Medical cannabis has the potential to save and change lives. So this is really powerful messages and real people. So approach to medicinal cannabis medicine has to be patient-centered, based on individual dosing, due to differences in the individual differences in the endocannabinoid tone. And the mantra in cannabis medicine is start low, go slow. But as a GP, when I started last year, I really didn't know what is low, what is slow, what is low, what is slow, and how far can you go. So I came across this wonderful article by Dr. McCallum, Dr. Russo, which was published last year in the European Journal of Internal Medicine, Practical Considerations in Medical Cannabis Administration Dosing. It was really very practical, very useful. And for any doctors here who consider prescribing, I highly recommend to read it. It gave me simple instructions, which are very practical and which I utilize in my practice. So dosing of THC is based on the amount, dosing of cannabis is based on the amount of THC in the product, because this is the part responsible mostly for psychoactive effects and adverse effects, which is usually fatigue, tachycardia, dizziness. So the maximum daily dose of THC is 30 milligrams per day. Going any higher generally doesn't improve the therapeutic outcomes, but can present more the possibility of more adverse effects. Most of the time, I'm quite surprised how little this patient needs, so just microdosing. But also, the 30 milligrams is not the ultimate maximum. Sometimes we need to go higher, and it's okay if it's done based on clinical justifications and careful and gentle titration. But also mind you that estimated median living dose of THC is more than 800 milligrams per kilogram. So recently I calculated, if I have a patient who's weighing 60 kilo and he's using cannabisol with THC of 10 milligrams in 1 meal, that patient would need to ingest 5 liters of that oil within 15 minutes at the cost of about $30,000. So I don't think it's really worth it. But when it comes to CBD, it can be tolerated at high doses, and however, we need to watch possible drug interactions. So the usual starting dose of the product is the 2.5 milligrams of THC in the product, and the half of the dose for cannabis-naive and elderly patients. And then we just titrate slowly every 2, 3, 4, 5 days, depending on the clinical conditions, until we get to this minimal dose, which is clinically effective and well tolerated by the patient. We want to establish minimal doses, not only from the point of clinical responses, but the cost-effective as well. And so now, as GPs, as doctors, we are going to face the increasing numbers of patients asking for prescription of medicinal cannabis. What do? We can say it doesn't work, it's illegal, I am unable to do that, or as even one of the doctors said, it's against my religious belief, or as I suggest and I recommend, that we respond to this patient, we listen to them, and then we assess them and hopefully prescribe. So what is happening in the initial consultation? Unfortunately, cannabis is not a first-line treatment. It is a second-line treatment. So we need to establish their eligibility. So if a patient comes to me for a certain condition, we need to establish that they're eligible. So we need to document the list of all the previous medications that they used, that were ineffective and caused adverse effects. We also have to talk about cost because it's very expensive, anything between $200 to $500. And for some patients, unfortunately, very sadly, consultation ends here because they are unable to afford it. We also need to disclose that this is unregistered product, that we need to apply for TGA. We need to talk about patient expectation. And that initial consultation is very important to establish that therapeutic relationship, but also the engagement of the patient. It is a teamwork. So sometimes patient expectation could be quite unrealistic. So we need to say, we need to be open and honest and upfront about what we can and what can't do. We talk about treatment goals. What do we really want to get from the cannabis? Usually symptom control, improving quality of life, mitigating adverse effects. We need to go through all the pros and cons, therapeutic effects, adverse effects, and the effect on driving. Now, it's important that we take thorough history. So the history of presenting symptom and underlying diagnosis for which cannabis is sought, past medical history, especially cardiorespiratory, like unstable cardiac condition, renal, liver condition, history of mental illness. However, psychosis, as I pointed out, is not an absolute contraindication. We can still get the product for the patient and help them. And plus family history. We need to go through medication review and just establish that they try different medication. Obviously, allergy, history of drug dependence and substance abuse, and previous cannabis exposure, because that will determine what formulation we use. We may manage differently cannabis-naive patients and patients who use cannabis before. And social history, living condition, looking after small children. In older patients, we need to assess the risk of falls, and employment history, operating heavy machinery, driving. So apart from that, obviously, we need to do our baseline assessments, such as pain score, symptom assessment, quality of life. Obviously, clinical examination is very important, and if patients don't have any results, would be good to order at least renal and liver function tests, and the patient have to sign the consent. So then we discuss different cannabis-based products depending on the age, medical condition, previous cannabis exposure, and required cannabinoid ratios. So how do we apply? Currently, we've got, we need to apply for a special access scheme category A or B, or we can use authorized prescriber scheme. The SAS-B now is the most common pathway to obtain medicinal cannabis, although the process is not ideal, but personally, I find it quite easy now. So now there's a single application process. There is no paper form as from February. This portal was introduced sometime last year, and doctors have to go to sas.tga.gov.au. They register, providing their upfront number, and then they can apply. So the system is really quite straightforward. They go step by step, need to provide clinical justification. That part is really quite essentially important and determine our success, whether we get approved or not. You can write as doctors as much or as little. I tend to write a lot because through my interaction with TJ, I learn about the common questions that they come back to me, so I simply preempt it. Brief history of the presenting symptom, then we need to list all of the medications that patient are using. If a patient is not, if I'm not the usual GP, I usually contact usual GP, and I also need to write it in my letter of clinical justification, because if I don't, TG will come back to me and saying, are you the usual patient GP? We also communicate with the specialist. We need to provide sufficient clinical evidence. Now, endorsement specialists, it's been a touchy point, because I think that we don't need special endorsement to prescribe Lyrica, OxyContin. We can just do it with a push of the button. Now, majority of my SASB applications were approved without specialist endorsement. I only had this endorsement a few times. But what I did, I simply called specialists and asked them, are you supportive of medicinal cannabis? A lot of them say, look, I really don't know anything about it, but if you want to, you can go ahead. And that's what I write in my letter. Then if a specialist saying, I'm against it, I am not supporting you, I'm not endorsing, fair enough, that's quite okay. And that's what I write in my letter. The specialist is unsupportive, unwilling to be involved, but I already demonstrated and established that this patient trialed multiple pharmacological, non-pharmacological options, and in my opinion is eligible, and I'm confident that I can manage that. So every single of my applications were approved. So do we do? Once we get this approval, usually comes in the email. We get approval from TGA and the State Department. I usually email these approvals to the relevant supplier, and then I call the patient for follow-up consultation. We go step by steps. I ensure that they understand everything. I give them written instructions, and then I also handwrite the script for this patient with the authority number from the state. I print the copies of the approval, and they go to the chemist. I usually call the chemist beforehand to ensure that they feel comfortable with dispensing. If they don't, suppliers tend to be very helpful here, and they educate the patient after that they agree. So the patient goes to the chemist, and the product is usually delivered within 2 or 3 days. I usually see them weekly until they're stable. I also provide my email so they can communicate with me anytime if there's any issues. So that close relationship doctor-patient is really ensuring the success of medicinal cannabis, because it's not just dispensing the oil, it's also proper follow-up management and monitoring. And then I generally see them every 4 weeks to 6 weeks or less often, depending on their responses. Obviously, during this consultation, we may monitor the response to the treatment, and hopefully that would look like that the pain is coming down, for example, with regards to pain. So I am quite confident to say that, in my view, cannabis is a very safe and effective therapeutic option in the management of chronic pain and many other medical conditions, especially when it is used in a proper clinical setting where patients are guided by the doctors and using high-quality standardized products. And I really feel that patients deserve that care, that doctors should respond to it, that they need us. They need our help to be guided. So what are the limiting factors? Still too expensive. It's too expensive. It has to be affordable and accessible for our patient. For majority of my patients are low-income earners or healthcare card holders or pensioners. They can't afford it, and they need it. To do cannabis properly, we have to have access to many different formulations and affordable as well. So for some, we may need oral, for some inhalation. Perhaps I would like to have the vaginal pessaries, rectal suppositories, transdermal patches, topical form as well. And even though I have to admit, personally now, I find the process quite easy, but there's still excessive red tape. I feel, that we should have a uniform, easy to follow system throughout Australia that will be easy to prescribe for doctors, and I think then more doctors will be involved. After all, we are dealing with so much red tape on a day-to-day basis. It's so easy just to prescribe anything else. Why shouldn't it be the case with medicinal cannabis? So my passion and my dream is to see cannabis to be integrated into modern medicine and to be used together with other modalities of healing. So I'm very proud to be part of Compass Clinic, where we're introducing this multidisciplinary care, where we will be working with other health professionals to ensuring the best patient's outcome. Because it's not just about getting well. We need to access so many aspects of healing: mental, spiritual, emotional, depression, lifestyle, nutrition, and so on. So I'd like to reach out to doctors. We should create the community of like-minded doctors so we can learn from each other, support each other. So I am available at info@medijuana.com. So if any questions, if I can be of any assistance, I am willing to share and help. And thank you very much.